All right, welcome. Give me a moment. So welcome to this Out of Eden Learn Hangout session. This session is part of a regular series of conversations among Project Zero researchers and educators involved in the Out of Eden Learn community. For those of you who might be new to Out of Eden Learn, I'll just say a word or two that we are a learning community and a companion to journalist Paul Salopek's Out of Eden Walk. Paul has embarked on an epic walk across the globe, and we are one of Paul's educational partners. So we've created an online community in which youth go through a learning journey of different activities. We call the activities footsteps. And our key learning goals for the journey are to encourage youth to really slow down, to observe the world really carefully, to listen attentively to other people, to exchange stories with other young people, and to reflect on how their lives connect to larger human stories. So we have a social media-like platform for youth to participate in these learning journeys, but we're also well aware that as people come together in social media-like spaces, how they engage with and treat one another becomes critically important. So today's session is really focusing on that aspect, on digital citizenship in the Out of Eden Learn community. But I think we're also going to touch on some general principles of communication that I think are relevant to any online community, and raise some examples from online dialogue situations that move beyond Out of Eden Learn. So I just want to introduce myself first and then invite some fellow Hangout participants to introduce themselves as well. My name is Carrie James, and I'm a researcher at Project Zero. With Liz Dawes-DeRising and Shari Tishman, I'm co-principal investigator of the Out of Eden Learn project, and I'm a lecturer at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. My research has been focused on the moral, ethical, and civic dimensions of young people's lives, especially their digital lives. And so this topic of digital citizenship is really near and dear to my heart and to my work. Having said that, I'll invite my co-facilitator for this session, Chris Sloan, to introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Chris Sloan, and I teach English and Media, high school English and Media at Judge Memorial in Salt Lake City, Utah. And so my photography class is the group that is involved in Out of Eden.
Great.
And I'll say a little more next round.
Natalie?
Yes, hi, I'm Natalie Belli, and I'm from Marblehead, Massachusetts, and I have grade 5 students. I teach language arts and social studies, and I Out of Eden now called Vagabonding. And Vagabonding is now incorporating Out of Eden Learn with global literature and also some international film. So I'm really excited about being here tonight.
Natalie, can you just repeat the beginning of what you said, the topics that you teach the learners that you're working with, because you cut out for a moment there.
Yeah, I've got kind of a tough connection, and I'm not quite sure why. But I teach language arts and social studies to grade 5 students. And with that, I've been with Out of Eden Learn for 2 years, and then now with a Vagabonding Club for an after-school program for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders that's incorporating Out of Eden Learn with global literature attached to it now.
Great. That was much clearer. Thank you, Natalie.
Great.
So great. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the notion of digital citizenship. I thought that at least Chris and I, and Natalie, if she'd like to weigh in, would say a word or two about what digital citizenship really means to us. And so I'll start out by saying that my thinking about digital citizenship is really informed by the research I've been conducting with Project Zero colleagues over 7 years or so. And I've really been looking carefully at how conducting interviews, qualitative interviews with young people to find out about how they approach or think about online situations, and especially the extent to which they are sensitive to moral and ethical concerns or dilemmas that come up when they're making choices online, when they're talking with one another online. So just a big headline finding from that research is that, it really pointed to what I call an ethics gap, that many youth and a lot of the adults in their lives really exhibited blind spots with respect to the broader implications of their online choices for others beyond their small network of close friends. So I think that was a really important finding. We also noticed that some people really, even though they recognized moral and ethical issues, they thought about the larger implications of what some of the things they were saying online might be. They often disconnected from those concerns. So I've written a bit about something that I call conscientious connectivity, which I argue is a counter to the ethics gap, and it's an approach to the digital world that is much more mindful or conscientious of the potential implications of one's online choices, including one's speech and dialogue, for both oneself and for others, including people you know and people you don't know in a wider community or public. So, I mean, at its heart, it's really about being very reflective about the things that we say and share online. And that reflectiveness really involves a bunch of different features. It involves ethical thinking skills. It involves, doing perspective taking. It involves considering one's roles and responsibilities. Hold on one second. Just Liz is raising a technical concern here, and I just.
I thought it was because. Did you press stop? I think you might be okay.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. Sorry about that interruption. Liz was concerned that we were not live, but I think we are. So, I was talking about some of the elements of conscientious connectivity, and one key thing is ethical thinking skills. But before people can engage those skills and do things like perspective taking and reflection on roles and responsibilities and those elements that I think are really important for reflecting on our words before we share them online, we really need to be sensitive to the opportunities to use those skills. We have to be aware of moral or ethical situations and be motivated to think about them. So when I've thought about digital citizenship, I've really thought in these terms about how we can cultivate very reflective habits of mind and practices where we're thinking about the larger effects of the things that we do. So as I've been involved in developing the Out of Eden Learn community, I've thought a lot with both Liz and Shari and other colleagues on the team about how we can create a culture in which the exchanges in our community are really conscientious and respectful and reflective, but also authentic and meaningful. And how much do we do in terms of the design of the space or the platform, and what do we ask educators to do on their end to support Out of Eden Learn students and participants sort of around the edges of their experience to help them, be good digital citizens in our space. So with that in mind, especially that reference to what we can ask educators to do, I'd like to bring Chris Sloan back into the conversation to share a little bit about how he's talking with his students as they participate in Out of Eden Learn, and importantly, before they even start their learning journeys.
Sure. So one of the things that I'm really concerned about as an educator is my students' larger online digital presence. And the reason I want them to participate in Out of Eden is I want them to gain a broader perspective by engaging students from around the world. Because I think a lot of our problems in our society can be traced to homophily, where people just surround themselves digitally with people who are like-minded, and the idea of misinformation, where we feel strongly about things that we actually are we know very little about. So there was this study done by Klinsky, and he found that the people who know the least about especially controversial topics are the people who feel the most strongly about them. And so I feel like I want my students to connect with other students from other cultures and other places as much as possible, because I want them to, see the advantages of breaking out of those filter bubbles and the echo chambers that they can easily, like a lot of people do, they can easily just get trapped in those things. And that's been a really positive thing for us, is to think of our larger digital presence. So because I teach media and we have computers on a lot, in the room, and they're facing out, a lot of times their media will pop up, their Tumblrs or their YouTube channels, Twitter, that kind of stuff. And so their media presence is pretty transparent in my setting. And so I want them to realize, like, here's a whole picture, and learning about other people and perspective taking is really huge if we're going to solve these global problems.
Great, thank you, Chris. Natalie, did you want to chime in at all on this broad topic?
Well, you guys are like the experts, it seems, on this. My kids are grade 5 students, and right now, they're working through a lot of using Out of Eden Learn for revising and editing and thinking and reflecting, but I'm not seeing as much as far as, I guess what we're seeing things on 2 different levels. I mean, I've got this higher elementary type of level as far as thinking, and the kids are trying to think about questions that they still don't know, they know very little about as far as where Paul is, because they're still dealing with their sense of place here in Marblehead and the greater area. And so when they're thinking about the questions and being reflective online, I think they're still at that point where they're trying to come up with the deeper type of questions to ask. So we're still not there. So this is great for me, kind of hanging out on the side and listening to the 2 of you right now.
Okay, great.
And I would say, I'd just add that my high schoolers are not that much different in that respect, because we all are, where he is right now, I would say a lot of us in the U.S. are pretty unfamiliar with that terrain anyway.
Yeah, I feel like for my kids, they're so keyed into where they are, like just in their school and their community, and I'm trying to get them to just think larger and beyond, beyond Marblehead, beyond Massachusetts, beyond America, because I feel like they're so isolated within their own place here. So those are some of the things that I've been working with the kids, as far as them to be thinking more globally, and what does a refugee look like? What is this all about? And then when they're talking to some of these kids online, we've got some kids in Oman and also in Nepal, starting to get and more involved with some kids that are outside, like the American circle, because we've had a lot of kids within the United States.
Yeah. It seems to me that the age group you're working with, Out of Eden Learn, really hopefully primes them for engaging with.
Yes, that's what I'm hoping.
Across the globe at a later stage. So I just want to share a bit with the both of you, and then others who are viewers of this, our current thinking about our vision for our community, and specifically our community guidelines. For some time now, we've been thinking about digital citizenship on Out of Eden Learn in terms of engagement that's both authentic on the one hand, but also sensitive and respectful on the other. So, and we've been thinking in really broad terms about that. So up to this point, we've given some general suggestions to participating educators for discussing authentic and meaningful and respectful communication with their students. But I think at this moment we're really feeling the need to develop a more explicit set of community guidelines that are shared by teachers and visible to students as well on the platform. So I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully I can do this as artfully and efficiently as possible, so that I can show a slide that will give you a sense of our working guidelines for your thoughts. I'm going to ask folks to let me know when you see.
Yep.
Looks good.
Great. Okay. So as I said, our vision is really that we're shooting for engagement that's both authentic as well as sensitive or respectful is another way to think about it. And I think that what we want to underscore to participants before they begin their learning journeys is that Out of Eden Learn is extremely diverse with respect to nationality, religion, gender, race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, political views, cultural practices, a whole host of differences, and that we believe that diversity is a nice counter to some of the echo chambers and filter bubbles that Chris, you mentioned. And it's one of the main reasons why the community is a valuable and exciting place. But in order to ensure that it's a really safe place, we really want to propose that participants keep in mind a couple of key principles. So these are, in brief, the principles we've been working on. And one is just simply be yourself, because we think that authentic participation is really important. We want students to feel like they can share their personal stories and perspectives in an authentic way. And we think that the whole community will benefit from that. But in addition to being authentic, and sometimes there can be a tension here, we'd like participants to be, of course, respectful, so that no one in our very diverse community becomes offended by anything that's said. We also would like, in keeping with some of the words I shared about conscientious connectivity, we'd like to see a habit of reflection, being reflective about the things one posts. So the idea of, before you share a post or comment, reflect on all the people who will be able to read it. Students in your class, students in your walking party, teachers, both your own teacher and those of other students, and consider how that post or comment might be interpreted or misinterpreted by those different individuals and members of the community, as well as really thinking and reflecting about how someone might feel uncomfortable with something that you're saying, or upset by something that you're communicating there. And finally, and I think we'll get to this a little bit later in the Hangout in depth, is engage thoughtfully. That we really think that this interaction between participants and Out of Eden Learn is a key component of their experience. But we would like to see interactions, comments between students that are really thoughtful and hopefully go to a sort of deep or meaningful level. And so, we really have developed our dialogue toolkit that's giving students an array of options for thinking about how they can engage with one another that go beyond very surface comments like nice photograph, and then that's where the dialogue ends. So these are some of the broad principles we've been thinking about, and I'm going to leave the PowerPoint and return to the Hangout. And I would love to hear some thoughts from both Natalie and Chris around, whether these broad principles align with align with some of the things that you've been talking with your students about in terms of how they approach their communication in online communities, and maybe what's missing here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can speak for myself and my students, and this is something that we've been practicing, and oftentimes we're using protocols as far as our thinking. The toolkit has been wonderful. We tend to, when we're commenting from other students and commenting and posting, we have been taking different sentences, phrases, or words from somebody else's post and really being able to expand on them and extend their thinking has really been helpful for my students. The other piece that I think that's been really helpful is that my kids know that their walking party and researchers and other teachers can see what they write. And for my 10 and 11-year-olds, that's pretty powerful for them, because they're very aware of what they're writing. And we've been really thinking and working on revising and editing some of the things that they've written so that they are thoughtful, so that their work and their learning is authentic, their questions are meaningful. And I can tell you, just I think from going into year 2 with this with students, and especially with my kids in my after school club who are now being mentors, and we're calling them like guides, walking guides for some of these 4th graders and now 5th graders. They've really taken ownership, and they'll remind a student saying, you know what, is this the type of question that you want to ask? And because I think it can be a deeper question, and can you just talk to me right now on the side and tell me what is it that you really want to know about that person's post? And so I've been really fortunate to have developing leaders in my classes with Out of Eden Learn. The other thing that I just want to point out that I think is really important is my kids are very aware when they receive a comment that's not beneficial to them. And they'll be like, oh, I really wish, because I really wanted to know more about what it was that I did, and I really wanted a more, and they'll use the word authentic, a more authentic kind of comment. And so this week specifically, I've avoided kind of doing this, Carrie, but I'm starting to go on more and now posting some of my questions that I have for the students. I've kind of kept it their forum, but I'm going on as my alias name, Nancy Drew. So I go on and I'll put some comments so that they're receiving comments that I feel are going to be valuable, and they're going to help think about the next question, or a way for when the next footstep comes in that they might be able to think a little differently or a little deeper about something.
So trying to do some modeling of
the modeling, but also a way for the students to also go back to their own writing and their own thinking, to look and to kind of reevaluate their own purpose in this. But I have to tell you, all in all, and I know this is kind of a blanketed kind of comment right now, but my kids this year seem so engaged in Out of Eden to a point where, and somewhere later we might talk about some of the footsteps, but they're so engaged in what they're doing and how they're communicating to other people. It's almost like a hyper-awareness that they're online. So I'm seeing a lot of beauty that's really coming out of this from a dialogue standpoint.
It's great to hear. Thank you, Natalie. Chris?
Yeah, so some of the things I think, when I look over the 4 points that you mentioned, there's so much to say about engaging thoughtfully, but to me it starts with knowing, what's our purpose here? And so I stress to them, we're trying to learn about other people, connect with other people from around the world, and we want to understand who they are. So one of the things I'll do in Out of Eden is before we started, I wrote something in the forum for that walking party, just introducing myself and asking other people where they teach and who they are. And the responses there gave me a lot to go with. So I was able to go back to my class and say, oh, look, here's a journalism class in Pittsburgh. And we're studying media too. Let's try to maybe find some common ground there. And I think I had conversations with 3 of the other educators, so I start to get a feeling for who they are and who the class is, and then that in turn allows me to relay more empathy to the group. So when they, let's say, first read a post from a student from China, I'm pretty sure most of the Chinese students' English isn't their first language, the school that we're paired with. And so there's, there could be a couple of things that kids could do if you think about it. Like they could be condescending because the language isn't, as clear as it could be. But, we have to remind ourselves, and I function this way, I guess, a lot, and that is, well, let's think about where they are, who they are. Let's try to read between the lines and what do you think, everything means here. And then I think they're better prepared once they, again, change perspectives, use empathy, those kinds of things, that they are ready to participate better by first preparing themselves about what kind of community are they entering into and what's the purpose of their interactions. So those couple of things, I think then we're ready to make some posts or to make some comments that can be pretty productive.
Great, so really getting to know the context and where they're coming from a little bit more deeply as a way of laying the foundation for more empathetic or civil connections as they start to talk with one another.
Yeah, and then to get a sense for the ethos of the larger community.
Yeah.
It's pretty important.
Yeah, great. So I think it's a good time actually to shift from the broader vision and how we prepare students to engage with the community in a positive sense, and then think a little bit about what happens when something goes awry. And so we've had a couple of incidents lately, so a key part of our community guidelines is also thinking about and preparing for and understanding what kinds of comments or posts on Out of Eden Learn we consider inappropriate. So, you know, as part of the community guidelines, we're creating a statement around some of the posts that we do not tolerate on the site. So, including posts or comments that include negative generalizations about whole groups of people, posts that will likely make others feel uncomfortable, and posts that include personal information about the student who's posting and therefore break the privacy guidelines in our terms of service. So those are some of the things we have on there that we want to make an explicit statement that these are not the kinds of posts that we'll tolerate in this community. But then when something comes up, something that's a little bit more ambiguous, something that concerns somebody else, I think that one important step for us is to be thinking about our policies and suggested practices around inappropriate content or postings. So I want to share my screen again to show you some practices that we're recommending if and when something like this happens. It worked so well before. Let's hope that it happens as nicely this time. Is it working?
Good. Yep.
Good. Okay. Okay. So in terms of responding to inappropriate posts, you know, there are two different situations. First, when a student of yours has posted something concerning, and our thinking here is that what we'd like to recommend is that educators make this a teachable moment, but not in a way that's going to cause some sort of embarrassment or humiliation on the part of the student, because sometimes posts that are inappropriate or offensive are well-intentioned, or it's an unintentional offense that's happened. So I think that is one thing that's really important. Talking with the student individually, encouraging reflection around the post, and encouraging that kind of perspective taking around, you know, what are some different interpretations that could be created as a result of what you're saying here. How might different individuals in the walking party receive it? But we also think that when something like this happens, it's an opportunity for another class discussion, not a class discussion that calls out that comment or that student necessarily, but really calls attention to the need to review the community guidelines, as well as there may be class-specific online community or online communication guidelines that have been created. So doing that kind of let's review, and maybe asking all participants, all students in the class, to revisit and reflect on their posts. So to really encourage that habit of ongoing reflection. And we have a couple of recommended resources in our educators' guides. These are thinking routines, perspective-taking thinking routines from our Visible Thinking project. And so these are some resources that we think may be helpful. And then you have the case when another Out of Eden Learn participant, not in your class, may have posted something inappropriate or concerning, and you or your student has become aware of this. And we also see this as an opportunity for a teachable moment. We see it as an opportunity to have a class discussion where those community guidelines are reviewed again, and for students to revisit and reflect on their own posts, but also to do, I think, this important work of having a conversation about avenues for responding in a really productive way to inappropriate or concerning posts, because youth are in social media sites, they're out there, and they're likely to be in exchanges where something may go awry, and I think it's an important skill to have, to figure out ways to productively and respectfully respond to something that's happened online. So that is one thing that one element of these suggested practices that we're thinking about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Chris and Natalie, from the perspective of some things you've seen. I know that Chris in particular, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can go back to the Hangout. I know that, Chris, you, within your work with Youth Voices, has come across a couple of situations where online dialogue between students has caused some hurt feelings, has caused some offense. And so I'm just curious if you could share a little bit about that experience and how you and the educator from the other classroom both handled it on each end.
Yeah, this is the one that I have a few different ones in my mind, but one that really just always comes back to me is this student of mine who happened to be in Chicago on a November night in 2008, and she just happened to be by Grant Park. So Obama had won the election, and he was in Chicago, and he was in Grant Park, and he was giving the speech, and they just happened to be staying in a hotel right on Grant Park. So they went out to this, if you remember 2008, there was this pretty charged atmosphere. And so she wrote about her experiences when she got back home to Utah about this amazing experience she had, and, said, like, it was wonderful, we have our first black president, that kind of thing. Then a Latina girl from Brooklyn took offense to something she said. She felt like she was making it more of a racial issue than it needed to be, and so she wrote some kind of inflammatory language. And the day after that, my student came in and said, "Hey, have you seen some of the comments that have been on my post?" And she pulled them up, and she was pretty calm and collected about it. But in the meantime, my colleague in New York City, Paul, had seen the post, and he actually talked to the girl about changing some of the inflammatory language, going back and rethinking what she was saying. So we did some of that, and it was still, they did a little back and forth, and it was still, I don't think either, well, I'm not too sure the girl who was offended by my student's post was quite understanding what my student was saying still. I kind of got that impression. So we got them together over a podcast to talk about things, and the short story is the other girl, by the end of the conversation, had gone from calling her stupid and a lot of other things to really respecting her, because she relayed her story. My student relayed her story about how she herself had been on the outside of some discrimination in our own community, and the key point I think here is that we said to the student who originally wrote the inflammatory language, "So how do you think my student would feel if, after all you found out about her, that she's actually been someone who's reached across communities and across cultures, how do you think she would feel being called a racist by someone else?" And the girl, because she looked at it from a different perspective, empathized with her, and then wound up saying, like, "Wow, I really respect you and all you've been through." So I think it's this thing where, in this case, introducing them to each other and actually taking on the perspective of someone else and understanding completely changed the dynamic of their of that whole online conversation.
It seems like what I'm thinking as I'm listening to you share this story again, and you mentioned it the other day, but I'm glad you shared it here as well, is that you and Paul, the other teacher in in New York were both really instrumental in helping the students navigate this situation. And that's not a condition that most, it's not a set of supports that most youth elect to turn to when they're in social situations. But you know, having those prompts and supports to do that kind of perspective taking, ideally then transfers to these other situations. You know, doing that research to see if and when that happens is really important to know, you know, when those connections are made. But I really, what your example really calls attention to the powerful roles that you and Paul have been playing in this. I wonder if, you know, with these supports you see, like Natalie shared with her older students, if you see students then sort of adopting these routines on their own without your priming and without your prompting.
Right. It's, I mean, just a quick little follow-up. The girl from Paul's class in New York actually became like a pillar of the community. Like, she was probably the most prolific poster and commenter, and my girl was, you know, I mean, she was doing great things, you know, all the way through. So I think there was this spillover effect or some kind of ripple effect of treating them like problem solvers or helping them come to their own solutions to the issue that empowered them, and any other voices were very strong, and they already were, you know, pretty strong people. But I noticed that on the rest of that school year.
Great. Other thoughts, you either Chris or Natalie, you want to share on strategies, recommended practices for dealing with situations like this when they come up?
And I'll say one thing, and then Natalie can take over. But one thing I also think is really good to do proactively is to, when I find a good post, we'll project it on the board, on the whiteboard, so that everyone can see, and I'll have the student read it, and we'll deconstruct it. You know, what makes this so good? What are the things that cause this to galvanize this discussion? So whenever something good, even little things, I just want to pull it up and show it and just point out just one thing. And I think those proactive kinds of things, like this is what's good, my students, and I'm guessing everybody's students, they want to do good things. They want to do smart things. Sometimes we have to show them a little more explicitly what those are.
Yeah. You know what I love about that example of looking at a post, even a short one, is that it involves that kind of slow looking, that very slow and close looking that, you know, Paul is really about in our community, is about supporting in general.
Yeah, and that brings us back to that whole modeling element. And Chris, I was thinking the exact same thing, because I think it's so valuable for the students to see those positive type of posts, the ones that are really reflective, or posts that maybe somebody could elaborate a little bit more on. But when you bring up that post or that comment that you think is just so positive, I think that speaks volumes, and I think it's really encouraging for the students to see that. On the other side, as far as what my students know is, and I've kind of told them this, is they need to just kind of alert me to their classmates or anything that they see online. And that's where my kids are, once again, as far as their age, and they're kind of out there as protectors, you know, of this project, and that's how they see themselves sometimes. And so I'm not seeing as much as far as like inappropriate type of comments coming from my kids, but when somebody might reveal like their name or a little bit of their face on a video, my kids are kind of ready there to remind them to maybe do some editing, or but they're really trying to use that language of respect. You know, I've got a concern, I'd like to make a suggestion, and that's kind of the language that they'll use. I'm concerned that you mentioned your name on that post. I suggest that you think about your avatar, or you think about when you're writing not to put any personal information in there. And so I value my kids are responding like that, and I'm hoping that by looking at the modeling that's being done by some of the other kids in the walking party, that they're able to not only help them, but also look at their posts and be able to say, like, this is wonderful, you've made me think differently, or I used to think this and now I'm starting to think a little bit this way, and to be really respecting their perspectives on some of the different views, especially with the interviews that are being done right now in our footstep.
That's great, Natalie. I think as I was listening to you, those peer-to-peer interactions sound really powerful and really great examples of those students, and I think this is true for Chris's students as well, developing a sense of ethical agency, that they can play a part in developing socially positive communities, both on Out of Eden Learn and in other places as well, that they don't just have to rely on the adults, that they can take on these practices, that they have agency in the communities that they create.
Well put.
So one thing I'd like to do now is maybe, unless there's another word someone wants to say on this piece, is turn our attention to the dialogue toolkit and say a few words about why we created it. Does that sound like a good next step?
Yeah.
Great. So as I've emphasized throughout our conversation, exchange with other youth, both within America, who are in very different communities, for the students who are in America, or in other parts of the world with one another. A kind of global exchange is a big goal for our project. However, sometimes the dialogue within Out of Eden Learn hasn't gone as deep as we'd like it to see. And Chris, you talked about, calling attention to really exchanges that go a little bit deeper, and we think that that is really important. So one way in which we've been thinking about trying to provide more support for the conversations on Out of Eden Learn to go deeper is to develop a dialogue toolkit. And this actually started with a hangout that Chris, you and I did last March, where we talked about some of the challenges and opportunities around creating respectful and meaningful dialogue online, and we started trading notes about different tools and strategies you had used with Youth Voices and you had been working on in your doctoral work, and some of the thinking routines at Project Zero that we've been thinking about that are part of the learning journey, and we decided to develop this dialogue toolkit. So once again, I'm going to share my screen so I can quickly show us the set of tools, and then Chris, have you had an opportunity to find a couple of exchanges?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So I'll do screen share first, and then we will shift to you. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Great. So they're pretty simple, what we call dialogue moves that we'd like students to consider as they are about to type something into that comment box underneath another student's post. As you think about what you'd like to say, there are a couple of different things you can do. First, you can share an appreciation. This is, I have the thumbs up that looks like the Facebook like. But our task here is to go a little bit deeper than nice picture, to really be specific about what you like or value in the post you've read or the photos that are being shared. Second is really to probe for more details. Ask questions that are meaningful questions that will really give you insight into the other person's perspective, their experiences, their story, if they're sharing a story. The tool of snip, this is something, Chris, that you called attention to, is the move where you cut and paste a phrase or a sentence from the original post that you're commenting on, and you put it into your comment box, and then you write around it. Maybe you appreciate something specific that they've said, or you ask a question about that particular excerpt from their post. Doing some reflecting back, making sure you're on the same page about what you're communicating is another move. Making a connection, between something that was said in the post and your own experiences, feelings, or your own interests. I see a lot of that happening on Out of Eden Learn. Oh, I like, to play Minecraft also. And also extend. Describe how the post got you thinking in new ways, extended your thinking in new directions, or gave you a different perspective you didn't have before. So these are some short moves moves that we think hopefully get participants thinking about and sort of expanding their sense of the options for how they can engage with one another in the Out of Eden Learn community. And in our learning journey, when they come to some footsteps, we leave it open-ended as to which moves they'd like to use. But in other footsteps, we're really asking them, we'd like you to use the snip move this time around and share something from someone's post that you really found to be interesting or powerful. So there's a combination of leaving it open, but also being a little bit more directive so that they can practice some of these moves that we think are potentially powerful. The other thing we've done is we've suggested thinking routines. There's a link within the comment box to these longer, although still short, thinking routines that can also be used as a way of supporting dialogue or supporting reflection before posting a comment, like the Circle of Viewpoints does, but also supporting the dialogue or the comment itself. So the Connect, Extend Challenge could be the way in which you want to structure your comment. How do the ideas shared in this post connect with what you know? How do they extend what you know and what you understand in new directions? And what's challenging or confusing? What questions do you have? And the Connect, Extend Challenge really is a combination of those shorter moves. And then question starts. These are some, ask different kinds of questions. Don't just ask one kind of question. These are some examples of different kinds of questions. So these are some of the lean structures we're trying to incorporate into Out of Eden Learn to encourage a dialogue between participants that goes beyond some of the superficial exchanges that we've seen. So I'm going to flip back to our, here we are. And Chris, I wonder if this is a good moment for you to share your screen and show us what it looks like in Out of Eden Learn in the comment box itself and an example of an exchange.
Okay, so here goes. Let me know if this is, let's see. Did you share your entire screen or the Google Plus Hangout?
Desktop.
Desktop. Okay. See how this goes. Is it working for you?
Yeah, I can see it. Can you
listening to neighbor stories?
Can you maybe expand?
Does it is it showing listening to neighbor stories?
Yes.
Okay. So when you say expand, did you mean make bigger?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's
But
see.
maybe that's as big as it gets.
Is that any better?
Yes.
Okay. I can make it even bigger. So this is a student from China, and there's a lot of text there, but basically this person is listening to a neighbor's story who was telling about how her and her husband met. Seems to be this really long and involved story where they wrote letters back to each other, and they lost each other, but finally they found each other. So it's it seems like a really romantic story. Now I'm at the bottom. Can you see the rollovers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in class, then I can say to my students, all right, let's look at this. The thing I like about the toolkit is it's live on the page. So if I'm a student and I'm in the comment box, a lot of times my students would get down here and they'd think like, okay, what am I supposed to say? But these prompts, I think, because they're actually in the interface, seem pretty effective. So in class, when this was first put on the site, I said, okay, let's look at these things and let's talk about how we might respond to that particular post with an appreciation. And so someone would say, oh, okay, I could say, I'm thankful that you shared that story, that kind of thing. This next one, the probe, what can we snip from that person's story so that they know exactly what we're talking to? Because, it's been found in a lot of research that feedback, if it's specific, people key into it a lot more. So, I rolled over that and we all had a go at, how would we use that particular idea to, comment on that particular post. So the one that I think you can see that says it's MRAVR.
Yes.
Okay, so that was one where we were on the probe thing. So probe for more details, ask questions that will help give you more insight into another person's perspective. You know, she uses just a couple questions, but I think she's questioning and she's probing. She says, why don't they send young people to that place anymore? Your neighbor seems very passionate about her life story and how her and her husband came to connect. You're very lucky. Your neighbor shared this amazing story with you. Did she tell you anything about what was written in the letters her and her husband sent back and forth? I think it's really cool that they sent letters. Now everything is digital and less personal. I love the idea of writing letters back and forth to the person you love. So, you know, to me, there's a lot of comments on the page. I think that is an example of like using a probing comment to further the discussion. And one that's maybe not on the list that I think is kind of interesting is I have a student who's also studying Chinese, and so he's taken to trying to write Chinese back to the students. So they'll make a post and then he'll write in his Chinese, and I kind of like this response from Rainbow 7 here, how respectful they are on their end. Wow, Chinese is difficult to learn. If you have some problems, I can tell you the answer. You know, clearly, like, his attempts at Chinese maybe are not as fluent as they would be if he spoke in English. But then we had a great conversation in class about, well, you know, how do you think that feels for the Chinese students who are writing in English to us? And so that's a couple examples of some of the dialogue, and I will maybe stop there. How about?
Great, thank you, Chris. Natalie, do you want to say anything about the dialogue toolkit and how your students have been using it, thinking about it?
Well, first of all, Chris, I want to say that when you were showing that example, you know, you used so many of the, including near the end, you know, the whole idea of valuing what a student wrote about and saying how cool it was that this was so personal too. It was more of a personal approach, which I thought was also great as far as, you know, type of feedback to also have that value, the probing, the questioning, but the whole valuing in there, which was great. And it's made me think that I really need to start really looking at more how my kids are responding. I mean, we tend to respond with a lot of questions and then valuing. We use a lot of the connect, extend, and challenge when we're writing, but to just really look that closely at how to respond, because so much of our focus has been on what we're conveying, what we're putting out, and I think for me, just listening to this dialogue tonight, it's making me reflect on, okay, not necessarily what we're putting out that's our own, but, you know, what are we doing to build up that other person or to extend our thinking and or perspectives with that other person. It's so easy or easier when we're in front of each other like this. I mean, Carrie, Chris, you can see my body language, you can hear my tone, but when you're writing and you're typing online, you don't have body language and you don't necessarily show that tone. And so there's that whole other world of navigation for these kids. So, you know, how do you write tone? How do you express tone and that kind of feeling sometimes to really convey your thinking? And so I think it becomes a real online and ongoing kind of learning experience, you know, to be able to convey what you're truly thinking and feeling online.
Yeah, and I would say I'm really, really cognizant of the comments we make now. You know, we know that if we have an audience, we're a better writer, and so you've really got to be that audience for other people. They have to understand that it's a reciprocal relationship, and sometimes what I'll do is make them comment more than they post. For one thing, we'll go to a page and I'll say, okay, look at all the zeros. These are the ones, there are 0 comments on the post. Yeah. And then say, okay, you've got this one, you've got that one, you've got that one. So, and that's not, always the optimal way to do comments.
Right.
Like, technically, they should probably read through and look at the ones they're interested in. But I think it's important for the people in the community to get a sense that they're being heard. And that's a big push that I do as like you as commenter, you as interactive audience member.
It's interesting that you said that, because I just said that yesterday to the kids, because I was on and I was looking and I said, a lot of these kids, they're coming in after you. You've already done it, or you think, oh, I responded to my 3 comments, I've done this. But, some of these kids are coming in a little bit later, and they realize that themselves when they're posting a little bit later than somebody else. I said, you need to go back and you need to look at those zeros and how do you feel, because you come to me, boys and girls, with the, I don't have any comments, and, so put it on the other end. You're looking now at kids that have that 0 there. And go back and respond and really try to be thoughtful. So I really appreciate that you brought that up as well, to be able to look at it and make sure that people are included, because you're right. You want that audience, and it's like, all right, what's the purpose? No one's reading my post. No one's commenting on my post, and you really want to be able to build some of these kids up to be able to look at their own writing, to be able to respond, and to feel that they've been heard.
Yeah. I love these. I love this practice sharing. It's fabulous. And I just want to, before we close, because we just have 1 more minute, I want to just say a few things. First, I want to call attention to a couple of nice comments. I just figured out how to open the Q&A sidebar. Very proud of myself now. That have come in. First, Lucy Gray has mentioned and asked if we are aware of the Common Sense Media Digital Citizenship curriculum. In addition to some of the general resources that we've been talking about, there is full-fledged curriculum, and actually, yes, I think it's a fabulous resource. It's available online. You can download all the materials, register as an educator. I think it's a great set of materials, and we collaborated with Common Sense early on in our Good Play project when we were doing the research on ethics, and they were starting to do that educational work. So thank you for reminding me of that and asking me to call it out, Lucy. I am a fan of Common Sense. The other comment I want to share is from Zurich, Switzerland, where we have an educator who's mentioned that the examples that were shared tonight were really helpful, and her students are really eager to connect worldwide, and that they tend to have discussions about online communication in terms of forming connections of empathy, compassion, and understanding, which I think connects and builds on some of the things we've been talking about this evening, or this evening. It's this evening on the East Coast. So depending on what part of the world you're in, I think it's midnight in Zurich, and so thank you for joining us from there. And I want to say that we'd like the conversation to continue. We plan on posting a link to this hangout on the Educator Forum as a starting point for a longer conversation, a longer dialogue, hopefully one that's authentic and sensitive, where we can crowdsource some other stories as well as recommended strategies and practices from our great community of educators. So look out for that post. We'll get it up probably tomorrow. And I want to thank Chris Sloan and Natalie Belli for joining us tonight and sharing your words of wisdom. We're really excited to have you in our community, and thanks all for watching our hangout tonight.
Well, thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
Thank you, and farewell.
Night.
Good night, Carrie. Good night, Chris.
Good night.
Night, Natalie.